Who will be the next great rookie quarterback? It's time for a 2023 NFL Draft quarterback deep dive. Who should you be targeting? That and more tonight on the Footballguys College Football Show.
What's up, everybody? Like Jeff talked about, we're going to be going through the 2023 quarterback class, looking at it, deciding, all right, where the tiers are, landing spot, biggest questions about them. What are their ceilings as fantasy assets? Because I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot when we do these shows. And I see it a lot. Hey, here's the quarterback and he's good. Well, okay, but what do we think that where can we project him being a fantasy asset moving forward so that we know his value? So that's what we're going to be doing into, and we're going to be diving into these guys. And we're going to start with, I guess, our presumptive quarterback one, kind of. These guys are haters, but CJ Stroud, quarterback one, according to Christian and Jeff here, two experts here at Football Guys. What do we think of CJ coming in? Obviously, everybody's already talked about this kid. So we know a lot about him just in terms of everybody's been talking about these rookies for 2 months, 3 months, and us, we've been doing it for 3 years, it feels like, because we have. But Jeff, give me something we don't know about CJ Stroud, or just give me your idea of what do you think CJ moving forward? You've seen the pre-draft process, anything like that. Anything stand out to you about CJ? And you just take us away.
Well, Kevin, it might be somebody's first introduction to CJ Stroud, so we don't dismiss talking about CJ Stroud, the former Ohio State quarterback and probably presumptive number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. And
you're right. I'm sorry, Jeff. I am so sorry. If you are
plugging back in, they have been unplugged, and they deserve your very best, Kevin.
Okay, first of all, I didn't say I wasn't gonna be good. You just assume I'm not gonna be good because that's how much you like me. But I'm sorry. CJ Stroud, 6'3", 214. He was a 4-star athlete. No, okay. So when we're thinking of CJ coming in from Ohio State, what do we need to know about him, Jeff?
I think the NFL pro style is the biggest thing that stands out. Prototypical size. I know Christian did a fantastic article today that was released today on NFL archetypes. So CJ Stroud fits that profile that NFL teams have looked for years. And he has the mobility. And I think that it's important to note that while he didn't rush for yards, and maybe if you look at a spreadsheet and you didn't see rushing yards, I think that what we saw with Justin Fields coming into the NFL versus what he put on production at Ohio State tells you something about how that offense wanted to be run. If you look at the national championship game, CJ Stroud showed that athleticism. At the very minimum, he has functional athleticism to play the position, to move in the pocket, to do the types of things like Joe Burrow's able to do, avoid rush, be able to deliver the ball downfield. To the upside, he might be that rushing quarterback that you haven't seen and certainly didn't test super well in the athleticism to kind of move that direction. But I think that there's more there that if you were to just look at the stat sheet, there's more there than what you've seen. But again, the prototype, what you want to see, he's got accuracy. He throws probably the best ball in the class. I think the tightest spiral in the class, might not have the biggest arm in the class, but he can make all the throws that you want to see. And so that's really the whole package when you wrap it all together. And that's probably why he will be the first player selected in the draft.
Yeah. CJ Stroud, he's a fun quarterback. And I think, when we talk about fantasy, we tend to get enamored with the mobile guys and the guys that do put up a lot of rushing in college. And I think rightfully so. Part of that article was just highlighting how impactful rushing yards are for quarterbacks. It's a thing that's definitely being introduced to NFL offenses, and it's kind of becoming a mainstay that NFL teams are looking for guys that can move around. Now, CJ Stroud did run a lot of RPOs at Ohio State. It's just their best option was most of the time to hand the ball off. Now, I know Ohio State fans got pretty upset with CJ Stroud for not keeping a little bit more, but what it did is it ended up setting up that him keeping in the biggest game of his life in that last game against Georgia. But in terms of what he does provide, he is one of the most accurate quarterbacks I've ever watched in college football. He can basically throw a 40-yard ball that looks like a handoff. It helps when you have such great receivers and such a great offense, but I don't think that should be used to minimize how great CJ Stroud was throwing the football downfield. He's also accurate to the short and intermediate areas. He's got pinned up footwork. He's got one of the best releases in the class, if not the best. He is everything that you're looking for in a starting quarterback at the NFL level. I did pull up the NFL draft odds because, and I'm not sure if these are the most current odds, but it says that he's minus 333 to be the first overall pick. So that's pretty heavily favored. This time, a couple years ago, I think you'll see these odds move as the draft gets closer if we get more information. But CJ Stroud looks like he should be the first overall pick, in my opinion, and it seems like that's where we're headed.
All right, Jeff, I'll kick it to you. Panthers probably going to go there based on what we think of the mocks and based on the odds that Christian has talked about. Here's what the new look Panthers look like. Miles Sanders at running back, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Terrace Marshall Jr. is projected to start right now. They got Shee Smith there. Laviska, we've always been big Laviska's fans. I'm just kidding. We have not. But hey, he's there. He's out there on the field. And I will say their offensive line is not bad. Like, I think their offensive line can be a strength of theirs. Do you like those weapons around him? Do you think Stroud can elevate those weapons around him? How do you feel about those weapons?
I think it's important to note that they're still going to have that early second round pick. And so that while they did move up, they still have that pick. And so if you were to add like a Josh Downs into that mix, what would you think about that situation then? Is I think that color that context, because I think that we've seen through their free agency movement, they're willing and able and really aggressively adding NFL starting level talent around CJ Stroud, especially at the skill positions. That's what Miles Sanders is, a starting running back. And if you want to make all the jokes you want about Miles Sanders, and I know the frustrations up until this past year in fantasy and all of that, but his rookie year, when he was playing with Carson Wentz, he was really involved as a pass catching back. And that just wasn't an element within the Jalen Hurts offense. And he has that skill set. And when you look at Adam Thielen, that's a professional wide receiver. I know his play fell off a little bit at the end of last year through his career, but that's a player that he can work the slot. He can be that reliable slot receiver or work outside. DJ Chark, we've seen his ability to stretch the field vertically when he's available and make plays downfield. And I think that when you really look at it, they're really one piece away, I think, for that wide receiver room to start to feel really good about putting a rookie into that situation. A lot of what you don't see typically in rookies that go in the top 5 of the draft, the offenses are not built around those players to allow them to succeed. And I do think that that's one thing. The Panthers they're not a good team last year, but they were not an awful team last year. They were right on the fringe there. They were the 9th pick. They didn't earn that number 1 overall pick by being atrocious. And I think that that's something to consider in the situation that Stroud would be put into. They have a lot of nice young pieces on the defense that I think will allow them to keep in games. And I don't think you'll get into a situation where the defense is putting the offense way behind. CJ Stroud is forced to throw all game long and just gets beaten up like we've seen a lot of number 1 overall pick quarterbacks end up doing. And so I think that all those things roll together, wrap together, and kind of make you feel better than what a normal number 1 overall pick quarterback steps into.
So hypothetically, though, let's say he's not the first overall pick, because that has been floated around recently. Bryce Young's getting a little more buzz. There have been some reports out of some Panthers beat writers that maybe Bryce Young is favored. There's a report floating out there now that owner David Tepper wants the team to select Bryce. The team wants to select CJ. I don't know if any of these are true, and this is all speculation, as with most things in draft season. But the reason I bring this up, are we as into CJ Stroud if he goes to a team like the Colts, where he has to kind of battle with, they don't really have a left tackle right now. They've got some inconsistencies on that offensive line. And if we're talking about like a weakness of CJ Stroud's, I think it would be handling pressure. Now, we have the one outlier game against Georgia where he was able to create, he was able to navigate pockets and at an incredibly high level. But on a game-to-game basis, that was not one of CJ Stroud's strengths. So if he goes to Indy, Kevin, are you further down on him? I know you kind of have Bryce Young as your QB1 still, right? Anyway, but is that a situation where you are looking at Stroud through a different lens?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to bring it up anyway. The under pressure thing's a real thing with him. And we watch college football pretty predominantly during the season. I think we can comfortably say Georgia's defensive line and defensive pressure got worse as the season went. And by the end of that year, they were not playing that well. Like, they were playing okay when they have Jalen Carter and these guys, but they dealt with a lot of injuries. And they didn't really get to Stroud that game. Like, there wasn't a lot of pressures in that game. From what I can remember, I know I was really pissed because I my team had lost the game before. But like, there was not a lot of pressure there. There was not a lot of things going on there. And now CJ did play well, but no, I think you make a good point, because I think that he struggles creating plays outside of the structure. And he didn't do that at Ohio State. Like, everything was in structure. Everything's very structured at Ohio State. Ryan Day does that for a reason. Now, it helps these quarterbacks in college, but will he be able to do that in NFL? I think no. I think you bring up a good point. I think Indianapolis could be a tough spot for him. And I don't want to say this because then I'm going to get canceled. Who has a better weapons, the Colts or the Texans? Or excuse me, the Colts or the Panthers right now?
How good is Jonathan Taylor and how good is Quentin Nelson?
I mean, yeah. But
I have an answer to the latter.
But when you're looking at overall, like, what weapons would you really want to be around Stroud? It's closer than it probably should be based on those two teams. Like, yeah,
it's definitely close. But I mean, I would still default to the Colts. But again, that relies on Quentin Nelson, I think, being that anchor of that offensive line. If that he's no longer able to achieve that level of play, the whole left tackle, I think that falls apart very quickly.
Yeah.
So walking it back just for 1 second. So Stroud, per Pro Football Focus, saw 19 pressures in that game against Georgia. Yeah. The next highest was 12 in the game against Maryland. I don't really know how Maryland was able to do that, but that's just kind of saying, like, that was the most he had seen pressure. And that was like, that's our sample size, right? Because like you said, everything at Ohio State was very buttoned up, and that's a product of that offense. But I think teams and evaluators went back to that game and said, well, wait a second, like, can he do this? Because that's earth shattering. That changes how you evaluate his play, because that game he showed off a lot that he did not throughout the year.
They moved him around. If you watch that game, he was on the move every single play, and everything was a forced action move out of the pocket. They moved the pocket a lot in that game. He was under constant pressure, but they were moving him. That was part of the game plan, and I think that was one of the biggest things that you didn't see as you watched Ohio State last year. You mentioned not being off structure, not being out of. There was a lot of standing in the pocket throughout the year. There was a lot of trying to establish the run game, because Ryan Day had it in his head that he had to run the ball against Michigan in order to beat Michigan, instead of just rolling the ball out and scoring 70 points against them potentially. But that, nonetheless, no, they moved that pocket quite frequently against Georgia, because they knew that the offensive line would struggle to hold up against that defensive line, and it did. Jalen Carter had a very good game in that game, and they definitely felt the pressure. But again, CJ Stroud moved out of pocket. He ran, he created in that game. And that's what NFL teams wanted to see. And it's just a frustrating point that you didn't see that all year long, because he does have that potential. He does have that ability. Yeah. Had we gotten 13 games like that Georgia game with that type of game planning and utilizing those skills, I don't think we'd even have a conversation about who would be the number one pick in the draft.
Yeah. All right. You want to button up CJ then? Dude, what do we think, Jeff? Number one overall?
Yeah, I believe he's number one overall. I think that there's I don't know. It's hard, because I can see the argument for Bryce Young, and I think that there are certain elements, especially intangible elements, that I think that Bryce Young brings to a football team that I'm not entirely sold on CJ Stroud being there. I think CJ Stroud is a little bit more cavalier's not the right word. Kevin, you're our California guy, but you don't have the laid back California attitude. I think CJ Stroud has a little bit of that in his persona when he comes to being a leader. And I think that Bryce Young has a little bit more of that rally around that classic quarterback type, that if you were to fall in love with that being your franchise quarterback. And then the elephant in the room is the immense upside for Anthony Richardson, and what that package, if everything comes all together, what you can get there. But I do think that Stroud's number one in my book. He has been, like, throughout the process through the past year, he's been number one, and I haven't moved him off. Despite my frustrations, I've not moved him off of that.
You were close. Okay.
You almost made him transfer. All right, real quick, fantasy seeing for Bryce, or excuse me, for CJ. Christian, what do you got?
QB1. I think, you're looking at a guy that can finish top 12. I think the main thing to remember, though, with CJ is, we do have a little bit of a sample size of him running. I don't think that that's going to be his MO at the NFL level. I think that could be sprinkled in, and he can get you those, like, Joe Burrow type yards. In terms of, like, yeah, he'll scramble a little bit and he'll create a little bit. But with that, you need a lot of volume for CJ Stroud to finish as a top 12 quarterback, because you look at the top 12 quarterbacks, they tend to run a lot. I think you're looking at mostly a back half of the top 12 type of quarterback, but that's safe. And in, super flex leagues, that potentially has more staying power than a guy like Anthony Richardson, who, we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I think top 12 is still his ceiling.
Jeff, same.
So the one concern there would be Carolina doesn't have their first round pick next year. And I think that we talk about Joe Burrow in context with CJ Stroud, because I think that there are parallels between the two of them. But when you look at Joe Burrow, so they added T. Higgins right away, the same draft class, that next year they were able to add Jamar Chase. And, if Carolina was going to be in a position that they were going to be able to add Marvin Harrison Jr. to CJ Stroud next year, you'd feel pretty great. But not having that first round pick, that's not going to be available. So if CJ Stroud clicks as Carolina's quarterback, then Carolina is going to be much better as you move along. And so it creates that natural question of, are they going to be able to get him a number one wide receiver? And is it going to be a couple years before they are able to be in that position to get him an overall that dominant number one wide receiver that you would love to see, that we are seeing pairings throughout the NFL? And so that is in the back of my mind of, is he going to be able to get that piece? Again, I think Christian nailed it, though, on volume is going to have to be an important part of his game. But, the ceiling is there to be a Joe Burrow, to be that type of producer that is even a top 5 ceiling is there. It can be achieved. We're seeing that out of Dak Prescott, who's not really running as much anymore, or Joe Burrow, those types of players. It's just volume play.
Okay. All right. Let's we spent a lot of time on CJ. Too much time on an Ohio State player. Before we move on to my QB2, hey, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you go in there and subscribe if you want. Leave a comment. Jump into the comments right now. Talk to us about these quarterbacks. What you see. I see some people jumping in and saying, "Hey, these are my rankings. Give us your rankings. Who are your guys? Who do you guys want there?" And also make sure you follow us on all the podcast platforms. But hey, hit that like button on YouTube. It helps. It really does help. We're gonna have some giveaways for that YouTube channel here pretty soon. So hit that like button. We appreciate it a lot. So let's jump into Bryce. All right. So he is your guys' QB2, I believe. Christian, QB2.
Yep.
And he is my QB1. So I obviously like him, but we'll go with what is the overall takeaway from Bryce? Alabama quarterback, Jeff. For those of you who never seen Bryce Young play, I cannot forget that now. I'm sorry. Okay. So those, Bryce Young, junior, when you're thinking about where he's at, 5'10", I guess a little over 200, probably not going to play at that weight, but he's extremely efficient. He's talking about a Heisman winner his sophomore year. That year he threw for 4,800 yards, 47 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And he almost led Alabama to a national title over probably one of the best defenses I've seen in college football at Georgia. So what do we think? What are we taking away from him, Jeff?
It's hard not to start off with the size, because that's a consideration, and you can't say it's not. But again, I think the efficiency, you nailed it there. He's very, very efficient. I think he's very smart. I think he does a lot more pre-snap of what you want to see in the NFL out of a quarterback than potentially CJ Stroud. I don't know if the physicality is there to make it all happen at the NFL level. And really, when you look at a lot of what he did with Alabama, especially his Heisman Trophy standout year, a lot of what he did was getting Jameson Williams the ball in position that he was able to create. And we saw Jameson Williams go top 12, top 11 in last year's draft. If you followed us long enough, my hot take was that Jameson Williams should have won that Heisman Trophy, not Bryce Young, but that is what it is. But and then we saw the level of play fall off a little bit this past year with Alabama without that depth and those NFL wide receivers on the outside. And there was everything that was rolled into that. And so I think it's hard not to mention the physicality with Bryce Young, but again, it's hard not to mention the intangibles and really what you want to see out of a quarterback.
Yeah, I'll start with the positives since Jeff really hammered home on the negatives. But no, I think he's probably the smartest football player I've evaluated in the last 5-6 years. And that kind of shows up. They have that cognitive test. I think it's called S2. There's a really great article on The Athletic describing that. And Bryce Young tested the best in this class. And there are rumors that it was one of the better ones ever. What that test does is it essentially tests their ability to process information. And that's the most important piece of quarterbacking at the NFL level. And Bryce is elite at that. I've never seen a college quarterback throw with such great anticipation. And I think that that's a really important piece because that allows him to kind of get away with that undersized nature that we've mentioned. We talked about it. There are times where he's guessing where players are going to be, but he guesses right a lot. And I think he's going to continue having to do that. And actually, it's probably going to be even more enhanced at the NFL level. But I do think that he's going to be able to do it because, like I said, he's probably the smartest quarterback or player in general that I've watched in a long, long time. That said, I think his accuracy is either pinpoint or it's spotty. I think that's where I worry a little bit, because if you get the bad or not as locked in Bryce, I think he's going to spray balls. I think he's going to be a little more careless with the ball at the NFL level than he was at Alabama, simply because of the nature of those throws. Now, Alabama, everyone talks about how great Alabama is and how great their the weapons around Bryce were. That was true in 2021. That was definitely not true in 2022. That receiving core was pretty rough. That offensive line played well, but not up to the Alabama standard. His best receiver was a running back. And I think that those are important pieces of like the regression that we saw in 2022, because I think Bryce Young still did a lot of things well. Another slight concern I have, though, is I didn't see much improvement. I don't know if like that insinuates that maybe we're at Bryce Young's ceiling, but that ceiling is still good. And, that ceiling, I talked about Stroud being my QB1. Bryce Young is right there as my QB2. And I think that grouping them together, and it's kind of just splitting hairs, deciding which one to go with, in my opinion, because I think they both have similar upside and are similar players.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Everybody knows I'm a big Bryce guy just because I've had him so high for so long. And it's one of those things where the things that he does super well are hard to like pinpoint because it's all intangible based, and it's all like, hey, and people aren't going to like it because you're going to say, oh, he's a gamer, but he's a freaking gamer, man. He's a gamer. He goes out there. Go watch the Texas game last year. They should have lost the Texas game last year. And if you don't watch anything, watch the second half of that Texas game. Everybody in that stadium knew Bryce Young was out there and that Bryce was going to win that game throughout the whole game. And if you watch the sack that wasn't a sack right at the end of the game, and he broke it off for that run, and he was able to kind of extend that play, like Bryce is just that kid. He steps out there and you're just like, hey, we can win with this guy. And I think what Jeff's point of view was with Stroud, I don't know how many of his teammates are like, hey, we can win with this guy. Like we know this dude's going to come out here and he's got all of it on the table for us, where Bryce is like, dude, he's a football player. Like he's going to go out there and that he's cerebral. He reads defenses really well. And Saban loved this kid. Like Saban, I think his biggest regret is going to be not winning a national title with this kid, because I think he loved his ability to process. And you could tell that they were really in tune with each other. And also to a point, he got injured last year. Like he was playing injured with that shoulder. So like there is also, you can also mention like he was playing injured. So there's a little regression there. But no, I think Russell Wilson was our comp in the rookie guide. But I think that when you watch Russ and what Russ has been able to overcome with that size is what you're hoping for Bryce. It's just Russ's bigger frame. Like Russ played at a bigger weight when you look at what Bryce is going to be. So I do understand that hesitation there. Like, don't get me wrong. And I do think when we're talking about accuracy and that stuff, Christian's right. I think that he does have pinpoint accuracy, but there's also times where I think he timed it because of his size rather than knew like, hey, this is where I'm going, and I know that he's going to be there. And he got away with some throws at the collegiate level. So that's stuff that's not going to happen at the NFL level. But you're hoping he gets to a good fit. So let's talk about fit. Jeff, do you think the Texans are a good fit for him?
I actually think the Texans are a great fit for him. I think that what you're going to see is Bob Slowick will bring elements of the Kyle Shanahan offense to the Texans. I think they're going to rely on a physical run game. They're going to have Dalton Schultz as the tight end. And I think that that's going to be a lot of what in that offensive scheme. I think that Bryce Young can be a souped up version of what you saw with Brock Purdy, of what you saw with Jimmy Garoppolo. The ability to use boot action, the ability to use naked boots, those types of things that move the pocket, that allow easy throws. And I think that fits Bryce Young's game very well. And I do think that those are going to be staple elements of that Texans offense. I think I like the fit for Bryce better in Houston, and they're going to be positioned with that 12th pick should they want to they can add another wide receiver there. Not to mention he's going to be playing with his college teammate, John Mechie, if that is going to be, if Mechie's back and able to play, and I think that that's an underrated element as well, and a level of familiarity between those two of those, I think that that's a very nice system and a very nice fit for Bryce Young.
We keep talking about fit to the teams that are like, we think they're going there. What about Bryce in the Detroit offense with his other former receiver, Jameson?
That would be the best potential fit.
I mean, what a remarkable. I would love if Detroit got aggressive here, went up to 2, because there's the report that the Texans aren't, 100% sold. I think they are sold on Bryce, though.
Yeah.
But that's the one I want to see. That's the best fit. I want that.
I've been wanting that for 2 years. He would be perfect because then we're talking about legit ceiling for Bryce. Like, because that team's ready to go. Like, and that team is, with that weapons that they have around them. No, I wish they would get aggressive. I don't know what Detroit's doing. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like they're comfortable with Goff, but maybe they're just going to wait 5 and see one of these guys drops to them or whatever the case may be. Like, I don't know. And then you get Seattle like out there as well. Like, so like those are the areas too. Like, you get those dudes out there. Jeff, what do you think the ceiling is?
The ceiling for Bryce, similar to CJ Stroud, it's going to have to be a volume play. I do think that Stroud probably has a slightly higher ceiling. Just I worry about really volume with Bryce. I don't know if you want him to be that volume type of player. And you mentioned Russell Wilson as a comp. Russell Wilson had a better arm than Bryce Young, and he was better built than Bryce Young to stand up to NFL physicality. And I think that what we're seeing now is a beaten down version of Russell Wilson. Granted, that's 10 plus years into the NFL. I don't know if systematically the way that you want to build with Bryce Young as your quarterback is a high volume offense like CJ Stroud has the potential to run. And so that is kind of my pullback when you're looking at fantasy in terms of potential ceilings there.
Yeah, I agree. Top 12 still. I think both of these guys are going to live on the back end of the top 12 in most years. And when we look at the entire landscape of quarterbacks, I think there's a very clear path to them doing that here pretty quickly too.
All right. We're going to tie a bow on Bryce. We good on Bryce, the takes?
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about this kid. Anthony Richardson, Florida Gator, redshirt sophomore, probably the most debated quarterback of this probably the most debated quarterback of this class. Levis is up there. But just in terms of intangibles, if you guys don't know what this kid is, 6'4", 244, was the most athletic quarterback in the RAS relative athletic score. He beat, when you're looking at Cam Newton in those areas. Production wise, not a huge production profile. 2,500 yards passing, 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions at Florida. He ran for 654 yards and 9 touchdowns. And that's what we like here at Football Guys for fantasy, is that he does have that rushing upside. And we're hoping that he gets the top 10 draft capital, which would be enticing here. We obviously comped him to Cam Newton in our guide 2 months ago. So if you've gotten that, you've already read that part of it. But what, we've been back and forth on Anthony Richardson as a show, as a group. I was pretty high on him last year, heading into the season, because I thought, hey, he could hit that. But I always was expecting, kind of like Christian, and Jeff, kind of where we thought he'd come back another year and develop, and then he left, and it kind of messed our timeline up because we didn't see that full maturation of him as a quarterback. But what do we think with Richardson here, Jeff?
Well, I want to start by asking you guys a quick question. If Anthony Richardson had been at Ohio State, where do you think that we would have these quarterbacks right now?
Well, Richardson wouldn't have ran at Ohio State, so I would put him. No, I don't know. Like I don't know. Is there?
So
that's a tough question.
Is the question? Did we make a trade? Is CJ Stroud at Florida?
Yeah, CJ Stroud's at Florida, and Anthony Richardson's at Ohio State.
I mean, yeah, Stroud would be QB3, I think, because I think that situation wouldn't have allowed him to succeed, which is a nice little segue, I think. Maybe. I don't know where your talking point's going here, Jeff.
But I'm just saying that I think that when you look at the total package of Anthony Richardson, as much as we want to say Bryce Young didn't have help at Alabama, of all places, I mean, Alabama was going up against Jacksonville State half their games anyways. And so I think that if Bryce Young didn't have requisite help at Alabama, I mean, I don't know what was going on there, but certainly we know that CJ Stroud was in the best position out of any of these quarterbacks, the players that were around him, the offense that was around him. And so I think that we saw CJ Stroud able to reach that ceiling in the Georgia game. I think the closest glimpse that we got to Anthony Richardson reaching that ceiling was against Utah, the very first game of the year. We know that Utah defense was pretty solid, and they played against Caleb Williams and ended Caleb Williams' season. They held up pretty well against Caleb Williams. Granted, there was an injury involved in that game, and Williams didn't have the mobility that you typically saw. And so I think that as much as we say with CJ Stroud in that Georgia game, if he had played 13 of those games, he would have been quarterback 1 with a bullet. If Anthony Richardson had played 12, 13 of those Utah games, I think he probably would be quarterback 1 with a bullet as well. And it was a lot more up and down performance. He is just, and it's not so much that he's raw, and that is what is talked about a lot with him. He's inexperienced. He has not played enough football, and I think there are two different things there. And it's, when you say raw, yeah, there's certain elements of accuracy that you want to see improvement on, but having those reps and the bullets that Bryce Young was able to see and the bullets that CJ Stroud was able to see in 2 years of starting, they've started twice as long as Anthony Richardson. And so I think that that's an important thing to wrap around all of this. And yes, we have the Cam Newton comp, and a lot of that's physicality and a lot of that's play style. But when I watched the combine and all of these quarterbacks on the same field, or you watch Anthony Richardson at his pro day, the thing that reminds me of Cam Newton is you can just see the infectious energy pouring out of him. It's almost like putting a kid right into there and just having fun. And I think that there's none of that in CJ Stroud's public persona. Like, the most you'll get out of CJ Stroud is a quiet little smile. And Bryce has those intangibles, but we didn't see that on the same field with the combine, because we know Bryce did what Bryce had to do at the combine. Bryce made sure he hit a number on the scale at the combine, and then he waited and pulled back. He didn't do any testing. He wasn't on that field. But we saw Anthony Richardson go out there, have competitive spirit, have the best performance really of all time out of any quarterback at the combine. And I think that those are things that you have to package in when we pull that back. And when we look at fantasy, the ceiling on Anthony Richardson is the quarterback number 1 overall in fantasy football. We saw that with Justin Fields last year. Through stretches of the season, Justin Fields was quarterback number 1 overall in fantasy, and that was just off the rushing elements, and that was not involved in the passing elements. And so that's there for Anthony Richardson. And the other thing that is in play potentially is if Anthony Richardson is not that first or second quarterback off the board, then we start to talk about the Seattles, the Detroits, that would be fantastic landing spots for Anthony Richardson. And so by the time we get a month from now, when we're going through the actual NFL draft, and when most of dynasty rookie drafts are happening, you're going to have that landing spot. And if you have Anthony Richardson sitting there in a Seattle landing spot or sitting there in a Detroit landing spot with that ceiling, I think you're going to have a very difficult conversation about who really should be the quarterback number 1 overall in the class.
Yep. I've struggled mightily to keep Anthony Richardson down. I told myself I wouldn't adjust any of my my actual grades on him, because I put film grades on them, and there was no new film. And as exciting as this time is, we don't have any new information, because what we knew is that Anthony Richardson is a fantastic athlete. That pops on his film. We knew that. We might not have known that he's the most athletic quarterback ever, but we knew he was a good athlete. The point I want to drive home, and you kind of started with this, Jeff, is people talk about him as if he's a project, and that, I don't think that's actually true. I don't think he's a project. I think he's got tweaks to make, but there is a clear baseline that a lot of quarterbacks don't hit, and they still get drafted in the first round. Richardson clears that. Richardson goes through progressions. It's not always consistent. That offensive line at Florida was terrible. But when he was given time, he would get to his third read at times. And that's not even something that we see consistently from CJ Stroud all the time. There are things that Anthony Richardson does. He sets his protections. You mentioned the intangible stuff, that he's a great leader. He's a great teammate. People rave about him. Those are things that matter. And I really struggle in the fantasy football game that we play to look at CJ Stroud and Bryce Young's body of work on the rushing front and look at Anthony Richardson's and say, yeah, these two are probably going to be better. Because I do think that with some development, Anthony Richardson is going to break fantasy football. Because if he's able to add all of those big plays that we know his arm can get him. If he's able to add some of that short and intermediate stuff and be a refined, accurate passer in NFL terms and still probably toss up 800 rushing yards a year, I mean, the ceiling is much higher. And so when we talk about the ceiling, when you ask Kevin, you're right, Jeff. QB1 overall, but also if he hits those benchmarks, it's a consistent top 5 quarterback because he does offer so much on the rushing side.
I think Richardson has the highest ceiling easily. Like, and when you're looking at him as a prospect, and that's easy to see. And to Christian and Jeff's point, when you're watching his tape, like, I know not everybody can get all 22 in college. Go watch all 22 game against Tennessee. Don't look at the box score. Everything that they just highlighted him as a passer, he had his best game that game, and he looked really good as a passer. Like, you saw his ability to kind of understand coverages, check in and out, get to different levels of the field, and then his rushing was on display too. Dude's a load at 244 pounds. Are you kidding me right now? Like, when you're looking at what he can do, like, I mean, he's 55 pounds probably heavier than Bryce Young. Probably, like, when you're thinking of just overall what they're probably going to play at. And that is incredible. Like, and with his rushing upside, everything is there. There's a couple throws in that tape, and I just keep going back to that tape because I love that tape, where he could not get taken down in the pocket. He was getting pressured. They were trying to grab him, and he was just breaking tackles like Cam Newton used to do. Like, when you saw that at Auburn and those other areas, but he was making throws off of it. Like, it wasn't him just breaking tackles and running. He kept his eyes downfield, and he was making tosses to guys, and that was his best tape that you saw. That's his ceiling. If he can hit that, then you're freaking excited about him, and you took him at the 105, you'd be like, oh my God, I just got quarterback 1 in fantasy. Now, he does have a floor though. Like, he might not hit, and you wasted a top 5 pick. And that's legitimate, like, where I believe where you're looking at from a fantasy asset. It really comes down to, are you risk averse or not? Because I think Stroud and Bryce are very, very safe. You're going to draft them. They'll probably be low-end quarterback 1s, high-end quarterback 2s in the format, no matter what, unless something drastically happens where they really struggle. They're not Zach Wilson-type prospects. Neither one of those guys are like that. Richardson, though, could win you leagues and win you money, which we all want. And I think that's the area that you're looking at, right, Jeff?
Yeah, and I think that you got to an important point. So everybody's floor is 0. Everybody has the same floor. Everybody's floor is 0. Everybody's floor is a bust. Richardson has a higher floor than anybody else either, is the thing. As long as everybody's on the field, Richardson, in terms of fantasy, has a higher floor. Because if he's on the field, he's going to, we saw again with Justin Fields, inability to really, and dispute what you want or whatnot, but not to have that passing production and still be the fantasy quarterback 1 for a real stretch of the season. That floor with the rushing ability is just so much higher. And I think that that's something that if he's on the field, as long as he is a top 5 pick, as long as the team is investing in him as being their quarterback of the future and willing to give him that time to develop and really throw him out on the field and let it play what happens, he does have a higher floor in the sense that everybody's floor is a bust, but when you're looking at production.
Really quick, but that's a great point, because the on the field thing is, I think, everyone's hesitation on Anthony Richardson, right? Like, and you might have to wait with Anthony Richardson because he's not, those refinement things are going to take some time, I think. So, yeah, but you're right. There is that rushing floor that helps in fantasy for sure.
I think my point was a little out of context. I was just meaning, like, I'm concerned that his floor means he's going to be standing on the sideline with a clipboard and a team's not going to buy into him. Like, that would be Bryce and CJ are going to get 3 years probably. Like, out there and develop, and you're going to have these guys in progressions. Anthony could sit for a year, and then what is he? And then you're gonna immediately probably lose value if you drafted him. And then there's always gonna be question marks. Look at Fields right now. Like, I mean, it's insane what's going on with Fields' narrative. And I think Richardson narrative could do that. And Fields is a much better passer than Richardson too. So I think that's where I meant with floor. As I get it.
You're right.
Where is your landing spot, Jeff, for him?
Landing spot. It's Christian has been hammering on this point, and Christian was one of the first ones on there. It's hard to not think of Carolina in your mind there, and I think Houston too in your mind there, because if Houston really wants to be a physical football team and run the football, there is elements I think that would fit Richardson very, very well. I think that we're all kind of circling the Detroit, and to a lesser extent Seattle, as ideal landing spots. I don't particularly want to see him end up somewhere like the Raiders. I think that would be less than as they have Devonta Adams and he's fun, but that coaching staff and that style of play, I'm a little bit more skeptical on the development where he'd land with the Raiders. I think would be a stay away spot for me. But again, if you put him in the right system, we're going to have real conversations, I think, in the next month about who should be slotted where.
Yeah. I also don't mind the Indy fit for him because of Shane Steichen's work with Jalen Hurts and Justin Herbert, which if Richardson hits his ceiling, he's a mixture of those two quarterbacks. So
that's my favorite fit, just because of the system.
Yeah.
Like that would be my favorite one, and then you just move forward from there. All right, let's talk about Will Levis. All right, so let's go to the Kentucky quarterback. When we're looking at him as a prospect, this last year he threw for 2,400 yards, 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Didn't have his greatest year. Really banged up offensive line for Kentucky. Didn't really have that going for him. It was really inconsistent. Probably his best season was the year before, his junior year, 2,800 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions that year. My first line writing us for the guide for Will Levis, I think is important, so I'm going to read it. Levis has turned a career worth of mediocre production at 2 different colleges in the top 5 draft buzz because people believe he has tools. That's what I wrote. And I think it's still true. I think, he has tools and he's ripped. You go on social media, the dude is just jacked right now. I don't think the physical tools are in question. I do think he has good arm strength. I do think he has good mechanics when he's in the pocket and he's not getting pressured. Like, I think he can make a lot of different throws. The narrative's kind of gotten weird about him. Jeff had kind of alluded to that today. What do you think about Levis, Jeff?
Well, I think that we all need to take a step back and, pat ourselves on the back and really just say good job, because we've all declared Will Levis is going to be a bust and everybody wants to see that, to be right about their takes now. And I understand maybe he's not the nicest guy. And he posted some pictures on social media that are memeable and all that. But again, I think the Josh Allen comparison where a lot of that spins out of. And I think that that's really unfair because he's not, I don't think that that's there at all, and we comped him to Carson Wentz and that type of player. And Carson Wentz, if you remember not the broken down sad version of Carson Wentz was very, very fun for fantasy. And I think that the biggest thing that when you're seeing in Dynasty, especially Superflex right now, is all the risk has been carved out of Will Levis. I mean, where he's going in drafts, he's going the 109, the 110, some places. I mean, you're looking at a Superflex draft here and yes, tools and think that you have tools, but if you're going to take him out of a 110 in a Superflex, and this guy, if he does go top 5, top 10, then I mean, you don't have any risk involved in that pick. And in reality, you're taking him over a guy that everybody else hates, Quentin Johnston now too. And it's you're talking about a 2-down back potentially, and Zach Charbonnet is the other options. I mean, it's just a risk-free pick at this point, and you may as well take that free square, especially in Superflex with the value that he's been placed at. I have hesitations on him developing and being that type of quarterback, and I think that some of the things are one of the things people are leveling him transferring and not beating out Penn State, but they don't. Do we think that James Franklin knows a lot about quarterback development, or do we think that James Franklin is going to look at things that James Franklin wants in a quarterback? And that's why he wasn't able to beat out Sean Clifford. I mean, when you watch enough Penn State, you know that they would have been in a much better place if Will Levis was their quarterback and not Sean Clifford this past year. And so I think that that's a kind of an unfair criticism that gets leveled on him. I just think a lot of what's going on is people that think that it's ironic to me, because you have a lot of people that are like, well, we can't accurately evaluate quarterbacks and we can't potentially put together a quarterback model. It's just so hard to predict everything. But Will Levis is most certainly a bust. And it's just kind of one of those things of if there's no risk involved in it, then why wouldn't you just take him?
All right. Well, we'll do the flip of how we talked about Bryce. Will Levis, I just don't think he can see the field, man. Like, I don't know what he's doing out there. And I don't know that he always knows what he's doing out there. The one game that really I said, okay, I don't know if I can do this with Levis and have these conversations was Tennessee. The Tennessee game, he made so many throws where I don't think he saw defenders on the field. And when you're a 23-year-old that has been in college for a long time now, we talk about, playing time. He didn't get all of those starts either those first few years. And so I do think that's worth discussing because starts turn into, actual development. On the other side of things, he's going to be 24 before he plays a snap in the NFL. And if you can't see the field yet, I do have questions about that. And then I guess I'll bring it back with, on the other side of things, summer scouting wise, before this year, I had him right in that group with CJ and Bryce. And I think at some point I had Levis ahead of Bryce Young simply because of the size factor and the tools and things like that. So he's a tough one because I don't want to be fully out on him because I do think that upside is intriguing. And like Jeff said, the value in drafts, I'm probably going to take a swing. I spent 100% of my fab dollars in a league on Will Levis as my QB2 because there is no risk in it. I potentially have a guy that can be a starter for 8 to 10 years, or I spent 100% of my fab one off season on a quarterback that is not my roster anymore. That's fantasy football. I think Will Levis needs a good situation. And I think that's where I worry because I do think that he's starting to slip in a lot of mock drafts. And I think that that's the buzz on the NFL side too.
I mean, and to that point too about so we're all in a stupid league together, dynasty that has stupid rules, but me and Jeff were fighting over Will Levis in the startup because we both needed a quarterback too. I drafted Will Levis as quarterback 18 in the 7th round as my QB2, and Jeff got mad when I drafted him because he was going to draft him right next. I knew he was, so I took him. I think at that point though, if you wait on quarterback in your Superflex dynasty leagues right now, and you're like, hey, Will Levis is going around 7th or 8th round, and he could be a quarterback too, and I believe in kind of his ceiling and what he maybe could do, that's pretty good value. And if you miss, you could plug and play some of these guys. I got Tannehill 4 rounds later. So if you want to kind of grab those type of that value, you can do it that way, I think. I did want to talk to Jeff because you did bring up landing spots. Christian, his landing spot's been all over the place. We've seen top 10, we've seen top 15, we've seen he's going to drop out of the first. What do we think realistically do we want him to go? I've seen Tennessee, I've seen all kinds of different areas. The Bucks have jumped in there. What do you think, Jeff?
I think Tampa is the most interesting because his ability to attack vertically within that, the remnants of that Bruce Arians scheme that loves the vertical attacking offense with Mike Evans still there. I think that would play into his strengths potentially with Tristan Wirfs helping him out on the blind side. Maybe that might be in play. Maybe would be a good spot at Tennessee. You mentioned that too. I'm hesitant for real fantasy production out of Tennessee just because I think the way that they want to run their offense, they want to rely on the run. They want to take the air out of the ball and do all those things. And so that might help in terms of development and take a lot of pressure off of him and accentuate that skill set, maybe with Treylon Burks attacking vertically. But I think as he pulls back, as long as you're not sitting with a Malik Willis situation here where he's going to land deep into round 3, and if he doesn't show it right away, we're just ripping cord and he's gone. I think that if he lands at Tampa, a later first round pick, as you pull back in the first round pick, he's getting into a better offense.
I want him in one of two places. I want him in Tennessee because the play action style that Liam Cohen ran in 2021 is where he excelled. And I want to see him do some of that again. That said, I mean, that would take a couple of years. Minnesota, the Vikings. In my recent mock draft, I had them trade up for him, give him a Justin Jefferson type, let some of that play action stuff work. I know they've kind of moved away from that under Kevin O'Connell last year, and a lot of that was straight drop back. I think they would adapt their offense to be a play action offense and let Justin Jefferson get open deep literally every play. Sure. Yeah, give me that. I don't love the Colts for him though, honestly.
I don't think the Colts with their system now, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I wouldn't like that. I like Tennessee though. I think that play action area would highlight him well. Something to kind of, I don't want to say protect him, that's a bad word, but something to limit his mistakes that he can tend to make with like you said, doesn't know where he's going with the ball. He needs that kind of a system. 1 read, 2 reads. Hey, this is where you're going, Levis. Let's protect you and do it. But Levis there's a quarterback problem in the NFL. And Levis is going to get run. If he gets first round draft capital, he's like Pickett to where that's actually an interesting question. Who do you think's better, Jeff? Pickett or Levis?
I think that Levis has a higher ceiling than Pickett.
Okay.
I think that the processing is probably with Pickett right now.
Okay. What do you think, Christian?
Levis.
Yeah, I do too. But we were notoriously not on Pickett either last year. So like,
Yeah,
I think I didn't like. None of us like Pickett. We still don't. We still don't like Pickett. Sell Pickett. All right, let's go to one last guy. We're gonna dive into Hendon Hooker, Tennessee Volunteers. We got to talk about the quarterback because he's getting a little bit of buzz here. 5th-year kid. He's a little older. He's 2 months older than Trevor Lawrence. Last year, he had a very good season until he tore his ACL. He had 3,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and consistently, he's been really good in the interception department. Like, he only has 12 career interceptions in his career. He takes care of the ball pretty well. He has really good accuracy from the pocket. Doesn't really leave the pocket very much, but he does have good accuracy there. Pretty good maturity. Like I said, I think I highlighted his decision-making a lot because I do think he made good decisions in the pocket. Whether you think that's because it's Tennessee's offense that highlighted that or not, I think that's the question you have to run in with Hooker. The injury, older prospect doesn't necessarily matter for quarterbacks, but I think first-round draft capital does. And now there's been some talk that he might get first-round draft capital. I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know if we're bored or maybe teams are out there that do really like him, and I think maybe that's it. But Jeff, really quick, as we kind of wrap these 5 guys up, what do we think of Hooker overall? Do you think he can get first-round draft capital? What are we thinking here?
I think it's in play, not necessarily the team sitting in the back of the first round, but the teams able to come up from the second round. And I think that there's value in grabbing that 5th-year option on that quarterback contract. If you're a team that is sitting, if you're a team at the beginning of the second round, you pass on quarterback at the very top of the draft. Maybe you take a Will Anderson or a player like that, and you decide that you're going to step back in and take quarterback. And Seattle's sitting right there, that they've got Geno Smith there right now. And maybe they decide where we want to end our night 1, move up, make sure we've got this guy, get him flown here and position him as the future face of the franchise and grab that 5th year, that cheap quarterback 5th year, and allow to have that quarterback contract, that rookie contract for team building and team development, because we know that there's value within that. And so that's kind of where my mind would be on potentially getting first-round draft capital. I think that what you saw out of Hendon Hooker this past year is what you wanted to see. You saw a very experienced player with 2 NFL wide receivers take advantage of a college system, because as much as he does play in the SEC, half those games are against bad teams. And I think that that's exactly what you would want to see out of a 5th-year senior playing with 2 NFL wide receivers.
It's a good summary. I like that. In my recent mock that I have already talked about, go read it on Football Guys. I was pretty proud of that one until like 2 hours later, and then I didn't like it anymore, which is all mock drafts. But I had the Titans coming up for Hooker at the back of the first. And I think that a quarterback needy team too, maybe not one of those like luxury picks. I think we could see that type of move to the back of the first too. We see that every few years. And I think Hooker's that guy that could be worth that. On the other side of things, I mean, that Tennessee offense, I almost made a joke when we were talking about Levis and minimizing, the reading the field. That's what Josh Heupel did for Hendon Hooker. I mean, I highlighted a few months ago, there's a play that is on their film from this year where the 2 receivers on the left side of the field don't even run routes because they're like, oh, we're going to win on this side because our offensive system is so good. We don't even need these guys running routes. And Hendon Hooker took advantage of that. Like you said, Jeff, that's a really good thing that he was able to, but it's a question of, is that because of his limitations, or was he put in an offense that limited him? And maybe he is able to go through a little more, reading the field and working back to the backside dig or, whatever it may be. I just have questions about that. And I think, these teams, the good thing is they get to see that in meeting rooms and we don't. And that's why he'll probably be a first-round pick and everyone's jaws will drop.
I mean, why is it not just Brandon Weeden? I mean, at some level. And are you not just getting the developed version right now of Hendon Hooker?
Yeah. But I mean, the developed version of Hendon Hooker could be a starter. Like it could be like hey, we can plug and play this kid, and he can at least he won't lose us games. I don't know if he's going to win us games, but he'll manage. Like we could be looking at another manager, which teams need. We see that out there. Like we see guys that, I mean, I'd probably take him over Tyler Huntley. And Tyler Huntley, look at what he's been doing, like for the Ravens, because Lamar's been hurt. Like you have these little guys that you'll throw in there. We comped him to Geno Smith. He could have a Geno Smith type, run-ish, right? When we're talking about him overall, like as a quarterback there. I don't necessarily like, I don't know. We'll see if he gets in that first round. I had him going in a second to the Titans in my last mock that I did. And I think that could be behind Tannehill for half a season, get him out there. Maybe he's coming back and he's in that play action system. Hey, he's got like that talent. Titans are in a weird spot though, as a franchise right now. They're at a weird, like need to probably blow it up spot.
My biggest knock on Hendon Hooker is mobility. And I think that when you see what NFL teams are looking for in quarterbacks, I think that as much as they wanted accuracy in the past, I think mobility might be number one on the list right now. And I don't know that he's got the injury, obviously, but at the same time, I just don't know that he's that mobile quarterback that NFL teams want to build their offenses around.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up to the time limit a little bit. Do you have anybody else you want to talk about of these classes? Anybody else matter?
I mean, we could see one of these guys. I mean, Stetson Bennett's next on our list, and we've seen the experience out of him. He's made some big throws, played some big football, and I guess in some regards that matters. We've seen. I mean, it's hard to say that none of these guys matter when we saw Brock Purdy almost go to the Super Bowl, and we would have laughed off and dismissed Brock Purdy at this point last year. And so I think that maybe it's less, I think, looking at individual prospects right now and maybe seeing situations and where players end up. And if somebody lands with a smart team that we feel good about and they have a relatively clear path or a injury away path to a starting quarterback, then maybe that's the player that you need to be in on.
I'm still laughing off Brock Purdy, though, so that's fine. I'll keep doing that. Just the one player that I think is getting more buzz in the draft community than the fantasy community, Tanner McKee. I don't think he's the athlete that you're wanting. I think also it could be a Davis Mills type of thing where Davis Mills had some value in fantasy football. And, if Tanner McKee goes to one of those quarterback needy teams in the second or third round, we could be looking at a guy that accumulates value and is probably a really good value if you're drafting rookies right now, even if he's not good.
You're talking about a guy that wrote 2,000 words on Tanner McKee one time in my earlier days as a fantasy analyst. I think, hey, Tommy DeVito, remember the name. I'm just kidding. Like I think I'm just joking. All right, let's go to the games. I appreciate you guys watching the quarterbacks. Hit that like button before you guys leave once we start playing the games. Like hit that. It helps us. Trust me. It helps us with the algorithm and it helps us keep our job. So hit that like button for me. Like if you like seeing Jeff a lot, I know, it's an acquired taste, but we do love him here. Hit that like button so that we can stay here. We're going to jump over to the games. We're going to pick some XFL games for you guys. We'll get a little prospect poker, be talking about that. And then we got some football trivia. So hang around. If you obviously listen on the podcast, you're going to keep listening. But if you're on YouTube right now, don't leave. Hang with us. We're going to have some fun, some shenanigans stuff. Let's get to it.
All right. The first game we're playing is called the Sportsbook Rundown, aka the Kevin and Jeff game. Jeff won last week. I am on a 25 game losing streak, I swear, in this game. And this week we're picking the 4 XFL games. First one, Vegas Vipers at St. Louis. Kevin, where are you going?
Give me the Battlehawks. AJ McCarron.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, it's St. Louis. That's been my team. I'm going to keep riding them.
Vegas, sure. Next one, Arlington Renegades or against Orlando. Jeff, you first.
Arlington.
I am next. I'm gonna take. Don't pick Orlando. That's the rule of the show.
Well, they won last week. They got their first win. So shout out Orlando beating the Houston Roughnecks, best team one of them. I forgot actually. That was
sure.
I'm sorry.
All right, who are you picking here?
I'm picking Arlington.
I knew you weren't going to pick Orlando.
There was no reason for me to talk there. I apologize.
It's okay. Next one, Houston at San Antonio. I'm first, and if Houston lost, I'm going to take San Antonio. That's my analysis. Kevin, where are you going?
I'll go Houston.
Oh, great. Kevin.
I'll go San Antonio. Sorry. I don't want to have every pick as same as Kevin.
That's fair. Last game, DC against Seattle. Kevin, you're first this time.
Give me DC.
Jeff.
DC.
All right. Seattle. I don't win this game anyway. It doesn't matter. I'm just picking contrarian picks here. And that'll do it for the Sportsbook Rundown, aka the Jeff and Kevin game.
All right, let's jump over to Prospect Poker. So, the game's simple here. We're going to be playing poker on the screen, but we are going to be doing a little bit of Masters week talk. We got Masters. If you like sports, Masters is the best week ever. One day I'm going to get there. I don't know when. I'm going to have to put on Jeff's credit card, but I'm going to the Masters at some point. So we're going to give you over-unders from the Masters. So, Christian, what do you got?
Rory McIlroy over 4 birdies. Rory plays well in majors. That's
all right. So we've got a 3 of clubs, a 2 of hearts, a 6 of spades, and Christian has a king of hearts. I'm going to go with John Rahm over 4 birdies. I think that there's a big 3 in golf right now, and John Rahm is one of those. And so over 4 birdies. I have ace of clubs.
I'm forever calling him John Ram now. All right. I'm going to go over 0.5 hole-in-ones on the week. So if someone's going to get a hole-in-one, give me that hole-in-one, baby, and cash that money.
A 4 of diamonds.
Straight draw.
Like that. My under is Vijay Singh under 1.5 birdies. Vijay Singh, old. Don't think he's gonna hit a lot of birdies this year.
Ooh, an ace of diamonds. That's pretty good draw there, Christian. I'm gonna go under Phil Mickelson 3 birdies. I think that they're gonna try to screw the Live Tour as much as possible, and Phil is the walking face of the Live Tour. So I'm gonna go under there, and I got a 7 of spades. I was really hoping I'd win this.
Is it tour or tier? All right, let's. I'm gonna go under 0.5 albatross, just because I wanted to say albatross on the show, on a national syndicated show here at the YouTube channel. So I'm gonna go under 0.5 albatross, but over 0.5 hole-in-one.
You got a straight, Kevin.
Look at that, baby! First straight in the show ever.
I think.
Wow. I don't know. I haven't.
I think we've gotten one more before, but we've done this show for 2 years, and so we usually don't get a lot of great hands. All right, so the last game that we play is we play blackjack. The way we play blackjack is we ask trivia questions when we do blackjack. You get a trivia question, you get a good outcome. Bad outcome doesn't help you. Christian leads us off with a 21. Of course he does. And Kevin has a 13, and I have a 17. So I guess we need a trivia question.
I've got him. I'm ready.
All right.
Who's this for? For Kevin. Kevin, over under 1990 as a year. What was the first year that Earth Day was celebrated? You can just hit me with an over and under. Yeah, Earth Day.
Oh,
never heard of Earth Day?
that feels like a hippie thing. I'm gonna go under.
Yeah, 1970.
Yeah, see?
Good job.
Perfect. I'm a history teacher. I know my shit. Sorry, Joe.
All right.
You just flip
All
another
right.
card for him.
Kevin, who is leading the XFL in touchdowns? Passing.
That's my favorite bit.
It's the Nucci, right?
No, it's AJ McCarron.
Oh, no, damn it.
All right. You
just bust. I bust, yeah.
Do you have a question for Jeff?
I do. I got one. Jeff, who was the highest graded player on the Ravens last year according to PFF?
Highest graded player on the Ravens last year according to PFF.
Don't overthink this.
Lamar Jackson.
Lamar Jackson, baby. Good job.
He is good, despite contrary to rumors. Lamar Jackson is a good football player.
That's why I laid that one up for you. I thought you would enjoy it. I thought that was good. Do you guys know the biggest surprise? The third highest? I know we have no time, but it doesn't matter.
Isaiah Dobbins.
Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah. He came on late in the year.
Yeah, he did.
Kevin, you won the show again.
Did I?
Yeah. We all tied. We each got one game. You won last. So
I enjoy where I don't have to actually win, but I just tie and I keep winning. I'm like Will Levis of this show. I just kind of keep following up. I appreciate that. No, hey, appreciate you guys. As always, hit that like button right now. I see you guys out there. There's one thing that I'm really near and dear to my heart. If you guys don't know what Devy is, or college football in terms of drafting Devy players, Scott Fish started it. If you guys know who Scott Fish is, he does all stuff with Fantasy Cares, all that stuff. He's one of the greatest human beings alive. And one thing about him that I really enjoyed is without him I wouldn't be here, and he's running a very fun masters kind of for fantasy and charity right now at fantasycares.org. Also, you can find him on Twitter at fantasycares.org or Scott Fish. and a free poll. All you got to do is go in there and you give your Masters winner. It goes to charity. Go do that right now. If you're watching right now, go to Scott Fish, go to fantasycares.org. It's a great, if you're in the fantasy community, if you play fantasy sports, go do Fantasy Cares right now with Scott Fish. They have a great team there. John Bosch, everybody there is special in terms of what they do for kids and just the charity that they run. So go to Fantasy Cares. Go check that out. Go get in the Masters pool right now. It's free. All you got to do is put your name in it and you're good to go. But also just donate. Get $10, $15, whatever you guys can do for the kids that they help in that organization. And I can't speak enough about them.
Good stuff.
All right. We'll be back next week. I think it's April 12th. I did the show sheet and I don't know necessarily how I can add, but we'll be back 9 p.m. Eastern. Until then, I'm Kevin Coleman.
I'm Jeff Bell.
And I'm Christian Williams, and you just watched the Football Guys College Football Show.